Welcome to the White Collar Files, the podcast that unravels the intricate web of financial deception and corporate misconduct. I'm your host, Ethan, and today we're diving deep into the historical roots of white-collar crime. Buckle up for a journey through some of the earliest and most impactful cases that shaped our understanding of these sophisticated offenses. If you're fascinated by the dark side of business and the psychology behind high-stakes fraud, you're in for a treat. Let's get started. Welcome back, listeners. Today, we're exploring the early cases of white-collar crime and their lasting impact on our legal and financial systems. As we delve into these historical accounts, we'll see how they laid the groundwork for modern regulations and enforcement strategies. Our story begins in the late 19th century, a time of rapid industrialization and economic growth in the United States. This era, often referred to as the Gilded Age, was characterized by immense wealth accumulation, technological advancements, and the rise of powerful corporations. However, beneath the glittering surface of prosperity lurked a darker reality of corruption, fraud, and financial manipulation. One of the earliest and most significant white-collar crime cases of this period was the Credit Mobilier scandal of 1872. This case involved the Union Pacific Railroad and a construction company called Credit Mobilier of America. The scheme was orchestrated by several high-ranking officials of the Union Pacific Railroad, including its vice president, Thomas Durant. Here's how it worked. The Union Pacific Railroad was tasked with building the eastern portion of the Transcontinental Railroad, a massive project heavily subsidized by the federal government. Durant and his associates created Credit Mobilier as a front company to essentially hire themselves as contractors for the railroad construction. They grossly inflated the costs of construction and pocketed the difference, siphoning off millions of dollars of government subsidies and investors' money. To protect their scheme, the conspirators bribed several members of Congress with Credit Mobilier stock at discounted prices. In return, these politicians would vote in favor of continued funding for the railroad project. When the scandal was exposed in 1872, it implicated several prominent politicians, including future President James Garfield and Vice President Schuyler Colfax. The Credit Mobilier scandal had far-reaching consequences. It shook public confidence in both the government and the railroad industry, which was a crucial sector of the economy at the time. The case highlighted the need for greater oversight of government contracts and stricter regulations on corporate behavior. It also exposed the dangerous intersection of business and politics, demonstrating how easily public officials could be compromised by private interests. Moving forward to the early 20th century, we encounter another landmark case in the evolution of white-collar crime, the 1920 Ponzi scheme orchestrated by Charles Ponzi. While not the first of its kind, this case was so notorious that it gave its name to a whole category of investment fraud. Ponzi, an Italian immigrant, promised investors a 50% return in 45 days or a 100% return in 90 days, based on a supposed arbitrage scheme involving international reply coupons for postage stamps. In reality, Ponzi was simply using money from new investors to pay returns to earlier investors, creating the illusion of a profitable enterprise. At its peak, Ponzi's scheme took in millions of dollars from thousands of investors. However, like all Ponzi schemes, it was mathematically doomed to fail. When the scheme collapsed in August 1920, investors lost an estimated $20 million, a staggering sum for the time. The Ponzi case had a profound impact on financial regulations and public awareness of investment fraud. It led to increased scrutiny of investment offers and prompted calls for better investor protection laws. The case also highlighted the importance of financial literacy and the dangers of promises of unrealistically high returns. Another significant early case in the annals of white-collar crime is the Teapot Dome scandal of the 1920s. This case, which rocked the administration of President Warren G. Harding, is often considered the greatest and most sensational scandal in the history of American politics up to that time. The scandal centered around the secret leasing of federal oil reserves by Albert B. Fall, the Secretary of the Interior under Harding. In 1921, by executive order, President Harding transferred control of the naval oil reserve lands from the Navy Department to the Department of the Interior. Fall then leased the rights to the Teapot Dome oil reserves in Wyoming to Harry F. Sinclair of Mammoth Oil, and the rights to the Elk Hills and Buena Vista Hills reserves in California to Edward L. Doheny of Pan American Petroleum, both without competitive bidding. These leases were granted in exchange for personal loans and gifts to Fall, amounting to hundreds of thousands of dollars. When the scandal was exposed, it led to a Senate investigation, multiple court cases, and ultimately, the conviction of Fall for bribery in 1929. He became the first cabinet member to be convicted of a crime committed while in office. The Teapot Dome scandal had significant repercussions. It exposed the vulnerability of public resources to private exploitation and highlighted the need for greater transparency and accountability in government dealings. The case led to important legal precedents, including the Supreme Court's decision that Congress had the right to compel witnesses to testify in investigative hearings. As we move into the 1930s, we encounter a series of financial scandals that emerged in the wake of the 1929 stock market crash and the onset of the Great Depression. These cases exposed widespread fraud and manipulation in the financial markets and led to sweeping reforms. One of the most notable cases from this period involved Richard Whitney, the president of the New York Stock Exchange from 1930 to 1935. Whitney, once hailed as a hero for his efforts to stabilize the market during the 1929 crash, was exposed as a fraudster in 1938. Whitney had been embezzling funds from various sources, including his own firm, the New York Yacht Club, and his wife's trust fund, to cover his mounting debts and maintain his lavish lifestyle. When his scheme unraveled, it was revealed that he had stolen over $1 million, equivalent to about $18 million today, from the New York Stock Exchange Gratuity Fund, which was meant to support the families of deceased exchange members. The Whitney case was particularly shocking because of his prominent position and reputation. His downfall exposed the lack of oversight and the potential for abuse within the financial industry's self-regulatory system. The scandal contributed to the passage of the Maloney Act of 1938, which created the National Association of Securities Dealers, now part of FINRA, to oversee the over-the-counter securities market. Another significant case from this era was the McKesson and Robbins scandal of 1938. This case involved a massive accounting fraud perpetrated by Philip Muzica, also known as F. Donald Coster. Muzica, a convicted fraudster with multiple aliases, had managed to take control of McKesson and Robbins, a major pharmaceutical company, and used it to orchestrate a complex scheme. Muzica and his brothers invented a wholly fictitious Canadian drug supplier and used it to inflate the company's assets and earnings. They created fake inventory records, sales, and even shipped empty boxes to maintain the illusion. The fraud went undetected for years, even fooling the company's auditors from Pricewaterhouse. When the scheme was finally uncovered, it was revealed that $19 million of the company's reported assets were completely fictitious. The McKesson and Robbins case had a profound impact on the accounting profession. It led to major changes in auditing standards, including the requirement for auditors to physically verify inventory and confirm accounts receivable directly with customers. As we move into the 1940s and 1950s, we see the emergence of more sophisticated forms of white-collar crime, often involving complex financial instruments and international transactions. One notable case from this period is the Allied crude vegetable oil scandal of 1963, also known as the salad oil scandal. This elaborate fraud was perpetrated by Anthony Tino De Angelis, the founder of Allied Crude Vegetable Oil Refining Corporation. De Angelis discovered a way to exploit the commodity futures market by using vegetable oil as collateral for loans. He would fill storage tanks with a few feet of oil, then top them off with water. Since oil floats on water, inspectors dipping measuring sticks into the tanks would be fooled into thinking they were full of oil. De Angelis used these fraudulently inflated oil inventories to secure hundreds of millions of dollars in loans and to speculate in the soybean oil futures market. When the scheme collapsed in 1963, it caused losses of over $150 million, equivalent to over $1.3 billion today, to various banks and trading companies. The scandal even brought down 2 Wall Street brokerage firms and severely damaged the reputation of American Express, which had vouched for the non-existent oil. The salad oil scandal exposed weaknesses in commodity inspection and collateral verification processes. It led to significant changes in how banks and trading companies assessed collateral and managed risk in commodity transactions. As we approach the 1960s and 1970s, we see the emergence of more complex forms of securities fraud. One of the most notorious cases from this period is the equity funding scandal of 1973. This case involved a massive insurance fraud perpetrated by the Equity Funding Corporation of America. The company's executives, led by Stanley Goldblum, created thousands of fake life insurance policies and resold them to reinsurance companies. They used computer systems to generate false documentation for these policies and even staged fake deaths to collect on them. The scheme went undetected for years, partly due to the complexity of the fraud and the company's use of multiple subsidiaries to obscure its activities. When the fraud was finally exposed, it was revealed that over 60,000 of the company's 97,000 life insurance policies were fictitious. The collapse of equity funding caused losses of over $300 million and shook confidence in the insurance and auditing industries. The equity funding case had significant implications for financial regulation and auditing practices. It highlighted the need for more sophisticated fraud detection techniques, especially in the face of increasing computerization of financial records. The case also led to changes in how regulators approached complex corporate structures and intercompany transactions. As we conclude our journey through these early cases of white-collar crime, it's important to reflect on their lasting impact. Each of these cases, from Credit Mobilier to equity funding, exposed vulnerabilities in our financial and regulatory systems. They led to important reforms, shaping the legal and regulatory landscape we have today. These cases also demonstrate the evolving nature of white-collar crime. As our financial systems have become more complex, so too have the methods used by fraudsters. From simple embezzlement schemes to elaborate computer-aided frauds, white-collar criminals have consistently found new ways to exploit gaps in oversight and control. Moreover, these historical cases highlight recurring themes in white-collar crime: the abuse of trust, the exploitation of complexity, and the power of deception. They show us how individuals in positions of power and respect can use their status to perpetrate massive frauds, often fooling not just the public but also sophisticated investors and regulators. Understanding these early cases is crucial for several reasons. First, it helps us appreciate the historical context of our current regulatory framework. Many of the laws and regulations we have today are direct responses to these historical frauds. Second, these cases provide valuable lessons for today's investors, regulators, and business leaders. They remind us of the importance of due diligence, skepticism towards promises of unrealistic returns, and the need for robust systems of checks and balances. Finally, studying these cases can help us identify patterns and red flags that might indicate ongoing or future frauds. While the specific methods may change, the underlying principles of many white-collar crimes remain remarkably consistent over time. As we move forward, it's clear that the fight against white-collar crime is an ongoing battle. New technologies and financial instruments continue to create opportunities for fraud, even as they enhance our ability to detect and prevent it. By understanding our history, we can better prepare for the challenges of the future. In our next episode, we'll explore how white-collar crime evolved in the latter half of the 20th century, looking at cases that shaped modern corporate governance and financial regulation. Until then, stay vigilant and remember, in the world of finance, if something seems too good to be true, it probably is. That's all for this episode of the White Collar Files. If you found this journey through the early cases of white-collar crime fascinating, don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more in-depth explorations of financial fraud and corporate misconduct. And if you enjoyed the episode, please give us a like, it really helps us reach more listeners. Until next time, this is Ethan, reminding you to stay informed and stay skeptical.